Man has been convicted and sentenced potentially to up to 10 years in prison for spreading a meme. He collaborated with other people on Twitter. They spread a meme. And the meme was that you could text a certain number to cast your vote for Hillary Clinton. This is for the 2016 election. And this man was convicted because he was spreading misinformation and he was interfering in our democratic process. Now, just to paint more context for this situation, there are other people on the left, because this guy was on the right, there are other people on the left, more people on the left, who have used this exact same tactic in the similar way to spread misinformation, or rather disinformation, the purposeful, intentional act of spreading misinformation about Donald Trump. Now, the people on the left are not convicted. The people are on the right, this guy, he's convicted. I will say this action is wrong. It is unethical. I don't condone it, but it is constitutionally protected. Now, I will explain this section. You have something called the Constitution, and then you have laws in the books, and you have penal codes, okay? Now, generally speaking, actually not generally speaking, 100%, technically speaking, all of the laws that are in the penal code, not just in the penal code, but just all the laws in general, they need to match, they need to align with the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Now, we have absolute rights in the Constitution. They're called the Bill of Rights, or they're also known as the amendments to the Constitution. If we go back in time, there were Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Federalists wanted a strong central government. Anti-Federalists said that would give too much power to the centralized government. And we're trying to break off from Britain at the time, and we need to empower the people to have some kind of power to balance this out. And thus, that was the clash of Federalists and Anti-Federalists. They compromised, they came out with the Bill of Rights. So the central government has a lot of power, but it's very specific powers. And then all of the other powers, they rest on the states, okay? So the different provinces in our nation and in the individuals. So now individuals have rights against their local, state, or federal politics. Now, when we look at the Constitution, we have the First Amendment, absolute right. Speech, religion, assembly, petition the government, press, okay? The big five. We have those as absolute rights. There's no reasonability in there. Now, we do have laws on the books that go against the First Amendment. So, for example, disturbing the peace, even though I would agree with it most of the time as a reasonable law, it is unconstitutional because the First Amendment is absolute. And so if you have disturbing the peace, and let's say, that's very broad, and it depends which city you're in, there may be ordinances that will be kind of like subsections to disturbing the peace. And so let's say you're outside and you're blasting music too loud in your car. That could be considered disturbing the peace. Or you're outside and you're yelling, and let's say you're in a public place too, you're yelling. That could be considered disturbing the peace. Now, officers will arrest you for that. They will detain you, or maybe they'll give you a ticket, depending on how they classify it as a misdemeanor class C. Or I would assume it's class C most of the time, but it could be class B if they wanted to escalate it. Class B is once you get to class B, you're hitting jail time. So they would arrest you for that. Class C, they wouldn't arrest you. Now, you have a right, especially on 100% on public property, to yell if you want. I don't condone it. I don't agree with it, but that is a constitutionally protected activity. The fact that we're seeing someone spread information, whether it's true or false, it doesn't matter. The Constitution specifically does not articulate whether it's true or false information. It's any and all information. The reasoning behind this is, yes, private citizens, there's a cost to freedom. There's a cost to absolute rights. What is the cost? Well, the cost in this situation, it's a trivial matter in relative terms to what this would expand into, what the centralized powers are trying to expand to. But in this situation, there is a spread of misinformation or disinformation. That is wrong. It's unethical. It's going to misinform people. This is where you have to do your due diligence, right? Because this is a cost. This is a cost to the First Amendment. There's detriment to this. There's negative aspects to this. The reason why it's an absolute right is because private citizens to each other will never do as much damage as what a centralized authority will do to its own population. 100% all the time, historically, right now, and most likely, if we're using historical data, in the future. There has never, I can't even think of a period of time, I'm sure we could research and maybe find one exception, but let me be articulate here, 99.9% of the time in history, and right now, it is always the current regimes, the current ruling bodies that oppress the individuals, oppress their own demographic more so than private citizens do to one another. And so the reason why we have absolute rights is not to protect private citizen from private citizen, although it is there to serve that function as well, but to protect the private citizen from a centralized authority, from your own government. See, the Founding Fathers were smart in a lot of ways. I do have criticisms of the Constitution, but the Founding Fathers were smart in a lot of ways. They knew they were coming from an oppressive regime. At the time, it was, hey, we don't mind getting taxed for X, Y, and Z, but we're not able to represent ourselves. You just see the colonies as a third leg of Britain. And so you're treating us very poorly. You're coming in, your soldiers are courting in our homes, which is also against the Constitution. They built that in there. And so they saw that a centralized authority could have so much power because they have so many resources and so much connection from the top down of the hierarchy that they can manipulate, distort, exploit the people. And they themselves can be the displayers of mis or disinformation. And so the only recourse that the individual has is to have power that is given to them by a founding document. And so long as culture, even if it's the minority of the population, so long as culture enforces that document, individuals have enough power to go against centralized authority. It's really their own government. It's not usually not foreign powers, not foreign affairs. It's more so their current government. And so when we see this event, although I don't agree with it, I don't agree with the ruling, but I also don't agree with the action that this individual did. This will be used as a reason, as a stepping stone, to increase more regulation over time to a point where, okay, you can't even share memes, right? What are memes? Memes are the cultural identity of the population. Not every person resonates with the same meme, but a meme is certain information that has maybe some truth in it, and you spread that around like an idea, like a seed, and you plant it into other people's minds. And humans have evolved to spread rumors and gossip. This is part of our evolutionary tract of why we're so social and why we actually need socialization to function. Like if you put someone in solitary confinement, you can actually damage their brain beyond repair. Even being in prison is pretty bad, but solitary confinement, you're damaging someone's brain beyond repair because your brain, our brains, are designed to function with other people socially. Now, this event will be used to say, okay, you can't do X, you can't do Y, you can't do Z because of this reason, and they will escalate it, right? The centralized power will escalate this to a point where you don't have your First Amendment anymore. You can't freely speak, you can't freely protest, you can't freely practice whatever religion or belief, ideology you want. You can't freely petition the government, and you can't freely have press. Now, I will say all 5 of these sections of the First Amendment have been corrupted. They have been compromised to a large degree. I just mentioned disturbing the peace. Noise pollution. They can say you're polluting with noise. Any kind of excuse. This is very bad detriment. I'll give another example. A lot of people say you can't yell fire in a movie theater because, again, that's disturbing the peace. Well, if you're in a movie theater, you're on private property. It's up to the owner, and the owner can give responsibility to the management, and the management can make a decision on behalf of the owner if they want to allow people to say that. If you're on private property, the people who own the private property have all the demands and all the rights of that property. And so if they want to allow it, they can allow it. Now, the local government, most likely in most places, even if you're in a conservative area, will come in and say, look, you can't yell fire in a movie theater, even if you, the owner, agree with it, because now this is a criminal action because you have the public. This is considered a public accommodation. You have the public, and so we, the state, have some intervention here. They don't have intervention. It could be considered a public accommodation, but the private property owner still has all the rights. So even the state will involve themselves on private property when they have no constitutional authority to do so. And we can find so many different examples of this. We can have people who are filming public buildings, government buildings, and you'll have officers that come and they say you can't film. It is your constitutional right to either from the outside or go into a publicly funded building and film. Like you can go into a post office and film. I'm not advocating for it. I'm saying what is protected by the Constitution. You'll have cops who say, no, the post office, they're kicking you out because you're filming. 1, they can't kick you out because it's subsidized by the federal government. And 2, you do have a right to film. We could go even further. We could say all these school boards or these city council meetings, you have a right to say what you want, even yell profanity. And the board, the city council board, and the mayor may even kick you out for saying profanity, and they'll have law enforcement there to enforce their rules. But their rules do not trump the Constitution. That's the problem. When our culture changes to the point where the Constitution is not at the top of our mind when it comes to what we can or can't do, look, there's a lot of wiggle room in America if we're using the Constitution. We have laws. We acknowledge that we have to have some constraints on society to have a proper and functioning civilization. But the Constitution allows for a lot of wiggle room. And so, yeah, there are costs to that freedom, but there are also a lot more benefits that you don't get in any other country in the world. And it's really to protect us from the government. If you look at all these other governments in the world, they don't, well, a lot of them have founding documents, but those documents are not enforced by culture. And the law enforcement just does the bidding of the state, of the centralized power. And there's a lot of oppression and suppression of the people with whatever the will is of the government. Sure, they still need public sentiment, but largely the culture is to obey the government and just maintain that, the government will just maintain that threshold right below a rebellion. And so, although this event is trivial in terms of, okay, I mean, it sucks that this guy is getting convicted of this situation, but this is trivial, but it's a stepping stone to a more radical position in 20, 30, 40 years where, like, it's not all of a sudden our rights go from 100 to 0. It goes 100 to 90 to 70, maybe back to 78, then to 60, maybe back to 65, then 50. So it's still going down over time. There's some push every now and then, but overall it's degrading. And when you don't have a country with individual rights, well, now the government, the ruling power, oftentimes there are a lot of sociopaths and psychopaths who chase power and status, right? So they go to the tops of hierarchies. So in politics is what? Politics is making decisions on other people's behalf. And that's a lot of power that you can attribute to yourself. You also have control over resources, financial means. You have a control and access to a lot of different areas of owning what people care about. So humans innately care about those things: power, status, money, wealth, connections. If you go into politics, you go into finance, you go to the tops of hierarchies, you have power and control over certain domains. And a lot of people go in there with nefarious means, malicious means. And so they don't care about collateral. I talk about collateral all the time. Collateral in this case is individual rights. Your collateral of you speaking out against what they're doing is a detriment to their current position in the hierarchy. They don't like that. And so they have to squash it any way they can. Now, over time, what they don't realize is this power that they're enforcing on the people, or the oppression that they're enforcing on the people, can come back to bite them. They just don't foresee it. They foresee that they can maintain that power long enough until the point of their death so that they're protected. But anything can change, right? So when you take the power and you redistribute it, you paint yourself as less of a target. You also embody, from an empathetical point of view, that any other individual like you can rise up in the ranks and go after opportunity, right? We live in a meritocratic system, which means we have social opportunity, we have economic opportunity. The people at the top, they don't want you to have opportunity because you are a threat to them. So they will find a way to create that barrier, whether they're in a corporation and they need to lobby Congress to pass regulations so that other corporations or other companies can't compete with them, whether they're a politician and they have to play dirty. They have to make sure that whoever's running against them is not able to run against them, whether they're part of the administrative state and they want to make sure that someone who's running for president is not going to become president because they would completely screw up the status quo and the establishment process of what the ideological agenda is. And so there are different factions of power here, different structures of power that a lot of people, the average person, doesn't see. And it all stems from our rights. If they can, like, speech is the biggest thing. Because we have, well, I will say the Second Amendment is probably the biggest thing, because the Second Amendment is the utility of force to ensure that all of our other rights are executed as best as possible. Now, that doesn't mean that we use our Second Amendment against the military or the state-owned law enforcement. It's to serve as a deterrent, right? So if cops come to your home in America, generally speaking, they're not just going to break in because there are consequences to that. They're going to knock. They might still harass you. They might still be forceful, but they're not just going to break in because there are consequences, negative consequences that can personally affect them as an individual. In other nations, they'll just barge in. They don't care because there's no Second Amendment. So the statistical likelihood of you being able to protect yourself or defend yourself or personally injure them, the officer, is very low in those other nations. So that is a deterrent to determine due process. And due process is necessary to upholding all of the other rights that we have. It's going to take a lot more, like culturally speaking, it's going to take a lot more than just saying, oh, okay, we have this Second Amendment as a deterrent for due process. It will take a lot more because we actually have to infiltrate structures of power. Even though you may not care about that, you may not care about being in a position of power or infiltrating the administrative state or being in this position or that position, it seems like kind of a burden, and to an extent it can be a burden. But if you have the ability and the competency and the willpower, you're doing a disservice to your entire nation if you're not utilizing your skills and your talents to go pretty much all in 100%. For some people, maybe you need 80-20, right? 80 business, 20% leisure or pleasure. But if you can go all in, and we can together, even if we're the minority of the population, 10 to 20%, go into these power structures and change these power structures from within, then we're able to take back the power and redistribute it in the most accurate way possible. This is a constant battle. Like every generation has to do this, because one generation of not doing anything, just standing by and letting things happen and saying, oh, the next person will take care of it, the next generation will take care of it, it never happens. And you'll have people who go in there, like I said, they don't care about collateral. They will go for shortcuts. And with those shortcuts, they'll be okay. But everyone else below them or around them will not be okay, including you. And so all it takes for evil to prevail is good people to stand by and do nothing. If you just sit there and do nothing, if you're neutral, if you're not actively in the engagement, you are doing a disservice, not to yourself because you're not utilizing your talents and your skills, but you're doing a disservice to the rest of the population who would be relying on you. And I'm not saying you or me or anyone else are these special characters, but maybe you have a certain talent, maybe you have a certain skill, and you can maximize that as your strength and cooperate with different people. Everyone else has different strengths, and one of the superpowers of humans is team collaboration. You're able to go into these areas, weed out the psychopaths, the sociopaths who just care about malicious power, and you can come in with benevolent power and not just hold on to that power, but once you get it, you redistribute it, and you maintain that system of balance for the next generation. Then the next generation will have to do the same thing, and it's over and over and over again. Unfortunately, 99% of empires do not go well. When I say that, I don't mean that mostly everyone perishes, although that does happen from time to time. But we do live under a tyrannical ruling for most of the empires. You have a monarchy, a kingdom, a sultan. You'll have power structures at the top who have consolidated a lot of power, and the bottom 80-70% of people really can't do anything. I mean, you can try to get into nobility and escape your impoverished community, but it's very difficult. And usually it takes generations. You can't really do it in a lifetime. See, here in America, you can change your life within, not even just in a lifetime, but in 5 years. Like now with the internet, now with the meritocratic system, opportunity, individual rights, the ease of building businesses, you can change your life dramatically in 5-year time. But then you have to know how to maintain it. And then you have to pass it on to the next generation, where your sons and your grandsons can also acknowledge what they need to do in their lifetime. This is a bit of a slight tangent, but it's an analogy to this political system. But you can have someone, the first generation in a family, build a business, do really well. He was poor, he grew up, he built a business, the business is worth $1 billion. The son will come in, he'll maintain it. He saw his dad build it, he's going to maintain it. It'll be that $1 billion business. Then his son will come in, not understand how much work that the grandfather put in and where his grandfather came from just to build it. The grandson is just benefiting off of the fruits of that labor. And often that business will deteriorate. And by the time you get to typically it's after 3 generations, but for this story, the way I'm painting it is, okay, now the great-grandson pretty much loses everything, or the majority of the business. And so it's unfortunate. That's how humanity goes, where you can be in a position where you have certain genes, skills, talents that allow you to be prosperous, and then 3-4 generations down, it's all gone. So it's a constant cycle, it's a constant battle of maintaining that balance of power, maintaining prosperity, maintaining all the rights and individual freedoms that we have that allow us to have the standard of living that we live in, and to allow us to even watch Netflix. All the simple things that you can think of. Take your kids to a baseball game. Very simple things that we take for granted all the time. That's opportunity. The only reason why you have that is because we have rights.